I had a lot of fun making my last Sonic physics video. It was without a doubt the best video I've made on my channel yet, and you guys seem to agree. So why don't I make another? Let's be honest though, that last one was a mess. It was really hard to follow. This time though, I'll try to explain things a lot better while analyzing a different Sonic character this time. And who else to make a video about if not our flying, fire-colored friend? Tails. What? You thought we were going to talk about Shadow? Nah, not this time. We've got this adorable furball to investigate first. More specifically, we're going to investigate his most powerful feature, his friend Tails. While I could take the same route I did with my last video and find the force he needs to go really fast, I've decided against that. Instead, we'll look at a scenario that's less extreme and hopefully easier to picture. If you're not familiar with Sonic heroes, Tails can perform a maneuver called Ascending Flight, where Sonic and Knuckles grab onto his legs while he carries them through the air before double jumping. He needs to spin his tails really fast, such that they give himself, alongside Sonic and Knuckles, an upwards boost. The force needed to move his tails this quickly is exactly what we're looking for. First things first though, let's make a free body diagram. A free body diagram is a diagram that shows all the forces acting on something, along with the directions of these forces. The forces we have to deal with today are the gravitational force and Tails' applied force. That's right, only two forces. His relatively low speed would make air resistance negligible, and he's not touching the ground, so there's no normal force. Our first step is finding the applied force, so let's instead start with the gravitational force. You'll see why soon, just trust in the process.
If you trust the process, then there's nothing to be afraid of.
The gravitational force is the easiest force to understand, as it's just the force that planets exert on everything around them. I'd be surprised if this wasn't old news. It's also very easy to calculate, as the equation is just the object's mass times the acceleration due to gravity. When finding the mass of something, it can be good practice to think of the object or objects as a system, and find the sum of all the masses in the system. For just one object, this doesn't really make a difference, as you'd still just find the mass of that one object. But when there's multiple objects, like in our case, it makes it a lot simpler, as we now know that we just need to find the sum of all of these masses. This doesn't actually make things any more difficult though, as we just need to find the masses of Tails, Sonic, and Knuckles. And a few quick Google searches later, we have 20 kilograms for Tails, 35 kilograms for Sonic, and 40 kilograms for Knuckles. For us freedom-loving patriots, that's 44, 77, and 88 pounds respectively. The sum of all of these masses would be 95 kilograms, or 209 pounds. Next is the acceleration due to gravity. The various stages on Sonic Heroes are set on Mobius. This is often referred to as Earth, so the acceleration due to gravity would be the same as on Earth, 9.8 meters per second squared. Simple. Now that we know everyone's total mass and the gravitational acceleration, we can solve for the gravitational force, which gets us 931 kilogram meters per second squared. This might seem like some nonsensical gobbledygook, but believe it or not, it actually means something. Newtons are the units used to measure force, and conveniently they're equal to kilogram meters per second squared. This means that we can just replace all this argle-bargle with newtons, giving us a gravitational force of 931 newtons. This force points downwards though, so it would actually be negative 931 newtons. Alright, before we move on, I should explain exactly what's going on in our scenario. Tails jumps off the ground while carrying Sonic and Knuckles before double jumping at the apex of his jump. But you know what? That's not good enough for me. I noticed that whenever he double jumps, this freaky fellow always gets the same upwards boost that gives him the same speed and height, no matter what. We can use this to our advantage. If Tails were to double jump at the apex of his jump, tracking his vertical position over time would create a position versus time graph that would look something like this. Note that Tails isn't necessarily moving forwards during his jump. The graph only moves right due to the unstoppable marching of time that slowly guides us all to an inevitable death. Following the graph, Tails first jumps off the ground and double jumps right here. The cool thing about these kinds of graphs is that the slope at any given point is a change in position over time, which is essentially distance traveled over time. And if we measure distance in meters and time in seconds, we get meters per second. If this looks familiar, that's because this is velocity. If we take the slope at every point on the position versus time graph and use it to make a velocity versus time graph, we get something that looks like this. This time, this graph shows Tails' speed rather than position. Following the graph, Tails jumps, moving quickly before slowing down and speeding back up again after double jumping right here. Keep in mind that this is considering that Tails only double jumps at the apex of his jump. But what if he double jumps a little later while he's falling? When falling, Tails' position versus time graph would look a little different with more of a dent before he double jumps. Again, using this to create a velocity versus time graph would give us this. Note that the negative velocity here means that he has a downward speed. But why is all of this relevant? How will it help us? To answer that, let's talk about free body diagrams. On any free body diagram, all forces added up correlate to the net or total acceleration of the object in question. This is no different for our free body diagram where the lift force plus the gravitational force correlates to the upwards acceleration. We want to have the highest possible lift force, so we need the highest possible upwards acceleration. Okay, we have all these graphs, but how do we find the acceleration and how can the graphs help us? Well, the slope on a velocity versus time graph is the change in velocity over time, or meters per second, or meters per second squared, which is acceleration. This means that to find the acceleration, we can use the slope of the velocity versus time graph to make an acceleration versus time graph. If we make two acceleration versus time graphs, one for when Tails double jumps at the apex of his jump, and the other for when he double jumps after falling, we get two very similar graphs. These lines at the bottom show Tails' constant downwards acceleration due to gravity, and these lines show his upwards acceleration when jumping off the ground. All these lines are the same for both scenarios, so they're not important to us. What's important are these lines at the top that show Tails' upwards acceleration due to the double jump. While these values are not to scale, we can tell that his upwards acceleration is much greater when he's falling. All of this means that to have the highest possible upwards acceleration, we need to consider the falling scenario instead of the apex scenario. This brings us to our final scenario. Tails carries Sonic and Knuckles and falls for as long as possible before double jumping just before he hits the ground. This is our final scenario, so we won't be changing it anymore. Alright, continuing from the gravitational force, what we now need to find is this, the total upwards acceleration. One of the kinematics equations for linear motion is acceleration equals the final velocity minus the initial velocity, all divided by time. If you don't know what kinematics equations are, they're equations regarding the geometrical aspects of motion of physical objects independent of forces that set them in motion. Constrained motion such as linked machine parts. Basically, they're fancy physics equations that are always true, and we'll be using this one to find the total upwards acceleration. The only problem here is that we know absolutely none of these values. But we can find them based on what happens in the game, Sonic Heroes. So let's do just that, starting with the initial velocity. For this part, I'll be adding subscripts to each variable to show which part of the scenario it has to do with. We'll be looking at multiple parts of the scenario and a few different variables, so this should make things much easier to follow along with. Due to Earth's gravity, Tails would have the highest initial jump velocity after falling from the highest distance possible before the double jump. The longest fall I could find in Sonic Heroes is this one here, in Frog Jungle, where you can just jump off this vine, branch, whatever you want to call it, and fall to the bottom. If we use the same kinematics equation we used earlier but for the before part of the scenario, this final velocity would be the initial jump velocity, the same initial velocity we're looking for right now. We know that this is on Earth, so the before acceleration is negative 9.8 meters per second squared. It's negative since this acceleration is downwards. While we don't know the final before velocity yet, we do know that the initial before velocity is 0 meters per second, as Tails' vertical speed is 0 the moment he starts falling. Lastly, I found the time from when he starts moving downwards to when Knuckles touches the ground to be 4.52 seconds. From here, we can find the initial jump velocity easy peasy. We can just rearrange the equation to have the initial jump velocity all alone and solve to get negative 44.296 meters per second. This is negative since Tails is moving downwards before he double jumps. We can now substitute this into our jump equation. 1 variable down, 2 to go. Though before we go and find the final jump velocity, let's find the time first. When he double jumps, Tails accelerates upwards momentarily before once again being accelerated downwards due to gravity. I would estimate that his acceleration would look something like this throughout the double jump. Note that he's still moving quickly just after the acceleration, since gravity needs some time to slow him down. Using this visual, Tails accelerates upwards for only 9 milliseconds. This is the jump time used in our jump equation. This leaves us with only the final jump velocity. For this, we'll have to consider the after scenario after the double jump. Here, Tails accelerates downwards due to gravity after double jumping until his velocity becomes 0 at the apex of his double jump. Using yet another instance of this kinematics equation for after the double jump this time, the after acceleration would just be the gravitational acceleration, which is 9.8 meters per second squared. The final after velocity would be 0 meters per second at the apex of his jump, and the slowing down takes about 35 milliseconds. Solving for the initial after velocity gives us 3.43 meters per second, which corresponds to the final jump velocity. At long last, we have everything we need to find Tails' jump acceleration. Substituting the final jump velocity and solving gives us a net acceleration of 530.28 repeating meters per second squared. If this guy accelerated like this for just 3 seconds, he'd be able to clear a whole mile every second. Alright, so far we've calculated the gravitational force, found a way to increase Tails' acceleration, and calculated this increased acceleration. Now, let's use all of this to calculate Tails' applied force, aka his lift force. If you recall a few minutes ago when I was talking about free body diagrams, I mentioned that the lift force plus the gravitational force correlates to the upwards acceleration. Note the words correlates to. I purposely didn't use equals, because acceleration is not a force. Forces create acceleration, but they are by no means equal. So, what do we do now? Fortunately, our good old pal Newton discovered a few laws, the second of which states that force equals mass times acceleration. We can use this to turn acceleration into force. If you remember when we were solving for the gravitational force, we found that our total mass was 95 kilograms or 209 pounds. We can use this, along with the jump acceleration we just found, to get this heap of numbers in units. When we were solving for the gravitational force, we also found that this mess of units simplifies to newtons, giving us 50,377.4 repeating newtons. This is our total upwards force. While the lift force plus the gravitational force correlates to the total upwards acceleration, it equals the total upwards force. We know the gravitational force and the total upwards force, meaning that we can rearrange and solve to get a lift force of 51,308.4 repeating newtons. And now we have the lift force. But we're not done yet, since this is the upwards force that Tails exerts using his tails to fly upwards. We're looking for the force that he exerts on his tails to spin them around. But how would we get there using the lift force? Here's what I've cooked up. First, we'll need to use this formula for calculating the lift force. Using the lift force we just found, and after finding all these variables, we can solve for the maximum velocity of his tails. but I've already written the whole script. I know that this velocity will be pretty high. At high speeds like these, air resistance, aka drag, becomes significant, so we need to calculate that too. The drag force is the only force opposing the movement of his tails, meaning that to keep a constant speed, Tails needs to apply a force to his tails that's equal and opposite the drag force. This force that Tails applies is the force he exerts to spin his tails around, the same force we wanted to find from the start of the video. But to get here, we need to start with the lift force. This is where the fun truly begins. What you're looking at here is the formula for the lift force for planes, or in our case, helicopters or drones like Tails. Remember, we already know the lift force, we're just using this formula to solve for the velocity of his tails. We just need to find all the other variables first. Let's start with this elegant and ornate looking P, which is the density of the air around Tails. Using this stellar air density calculator, I found that at sea level with a normal atmospheric pressure and near room temperature at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, air has a density of 1.2 kilograms per meters cubed. Now, we have the nefarious lift coefficient. This represents how good an object is at creating lift. It's mostly based on the shape of the object alongside the object's velocity, texture, and probably dozens of other factors. It's so ridiculously hard to calculate accurately that the only feasible way to find it is to find it experimentally through multiple rigorous tests. Fortunately, a small YouTuber called The Game Theorists made a similar video where they estimated the lift coefficient to be 0.2. But am I really someone who would make unethical decisions and take the easy way out? Am I really someone who would take someone else's work instead of doing my own extensive calculations and tests, even though I don't even know where to start? Anyways, with a lift coefficient of 0.2, we move on to area. This is the area of the circle that his spinning tails create, not to be confused with the surface area of his tails themselves. To find the area of this circle, we can use the formula pi times the radius of the circle squared. Each tail seems to be about the length of Tails' height of 0.8 meters, or just over 2'7". Wow, he's short. But if you look closely, you can see that Tails sticks his tails up and rotates only the second half of each tail. This means that the radius would only be half of each tail, or 0.4 meters, giving us a total area of 0.503 meters squared. Now we've got everything we need to solve for the last variable, velocity. After rearranging and solving, we get a velocity of about 921.98 meters per second, or 2,067.4 miles per hour, almost 3 times the speed of sound. In comparison, a helicopter of similar size and weight would have a blade velocity of about 100 meters per second in order to hover. Sonic's got nothing on this guy's tails. Alright, since we have the velocity of his tails, we can now deal with air resistance. The formula for air resistance, aka the drag force, is very similar to the formula for the lift force, the only difference in the variables being that the dreadful lift coefficient is replaced by the equally dreadful drag coefficient. Oh, also area, but that's less exciting. We already have the air density and velocity, so we're only left with the area and the loathsome drag coefficient. Starting with the area, this is the forward-facing area of the object, which in this case are his tails. This is not the entire surface area of his tails, just what the air in front of his tails hits. To find this, we can just use a 3D model of Tails and estimate the area from there. Using a very complex and elaborate technique I like to call putting a ruler on my screen, I found that the white part of one tail is about 0.04 meters squared. Remember, he sticks up his tails and rotates only about half of each tail, so I'm only measuring half of each tail. Since he has 2 tails, multiplying this by 2 gives us a total forward-facing area of 0.08 meters squared. Now, we're only left with the atrocious drag coefficient. This represents how aerodynamic an object is, and like the lift coefficient, it's really complicated and difficult to calculate. I really didn't want to use the same drag coefficient calculator I used in my last Sonic physics video, because I felt it didn't consider some of the factors that go into the drag coefficient, leading me to believe it wasn't too accurate. So So I spent all day for over half a week trying out different solutions. I tried deriving an equation for the drag coefficient, I've tried understanding how the sinister variable works and how it's measured, but everything I tried never ended up working for one reason or another. This left me with no other choice. For cylinders like the little guy's tails, this drag coefficient calculator only needs the object's velocity and diameter alongside the fluid that the object is in. We already have the velocity we found earlier and the fluid is just air. This leaves us with the diameter of his tails, which we'll find using the same 3D model we used earlier. Using my complex and elaborate technique, I found that each tail has a diameter of about 0.2 meters or 20 centimeters. Putting this value into the calculator gives us a drag coefficient of 0.455 for each tail, or about 0.9 in total. Some of you smart cookies might be thinking, hey, due to the circular motion in context, the velocity of his tails is proportional to the distance from the axis of rotation, meaning that the parts of his tail that are closer to his tushy would have a smaller drag coefficient. And to that I say, if you could figure that out yourself, you probably don't need me to explain all of this to you. Regardless though, that is correct. But decreasing the velocity by, let's say, 600 meters per second wouldn't actually decrease the drag coefficient by a very significant amount, considering how high it already is. But I also didn't consider that his tails end off in a cone-like shape, so we'll just decrease the drag coefficient by 0.1 and we'll call it that, alright? Finally, with a drag coefficient of 0.8, we have everything we need to calculate the drag force. And since Tails needs to oppose this force, the force he exerts on his tails is equal to the drag force. A smaller helicopter, such as the Robinson R-22, has its motor exert about 2,000 newtons of force onto its blades to overcome its weight and achieve lift. But to not only achieve lift, but also accelerate at the absurd rate he does, while carrying both Sonic and Knuckles, this small and innocent fox casually exerts a massive 32,642 newtons. And that's a wrap. Before I end the video though, I might as well look over my work and see if everything falls into place. Looks good. Wait. Oh, I see. It's just that everything I've done here makes no sense at all. His tails wouldn't work at all like helicopter blades. His tails are attached to his behind in a fixed place, so they would just get tangled up in each other. But okay. What if I'm mistaken? What if his tails could actually freely rotate around like a ballpoint joint can? Well, this still wouldn't work since his tails have muscles, which need nerves and blood, and I've got no clue how veins and nerves could go into his tails without being ripped apart whenever he flies. But studying anatomy isn't my specialty, so I'll give Tails the benefit of the doubt, and I'll assume that this is anatomically possible. Even with this though, it still wouldn't work, because ironically Tails doesn't have enough tails. Helicopters need to have a second set of rotors in the back to stop Newton's third law from spinning the body in the opposite direction of the rotors. Tails doesn't have this back rotor, so whenever he flies, his body should be spinning completely out of control, like a flying fox-sized Beyblade. I love this guy, I really do. But if it wasn't already obvious because of his bright neon yellow fur, along with his human-like appearance, proficiency in science and engineering, ability to speak fluent English, the extra tail sprouting from his behind, and its ability to move at speed surpassing the speed of sound, this lovable and adorable little guy is a complete freak of nature. Alright, the video's over. Get out! Leave. Shoo. Goodbye. Alright, for all you nerds who stayed because there's still some video runtime left, I want you to look at this. I don't know what I'll put here yet, but whatever it is, enjoy. Also, I've got some behind the scenes insights, if that's what you want to call whatever this is. Starting off with the video length, this is a lot longer than I initially thought it would be. The Sonic video was 15 minutes long, and the script had over 2,400 words, whereas this one is... well, I don't know how long it is as of writing this, but the script has almost 4,000 words, not including this part. I thought this video was going to be quick and easy, just find the lift force and turn that into the tail force. But that was before I knew how complex helicopter physics really is. I'll try to make my next physics video shorter than this one, but we'll see based on what you guys think. Speaking of the next physics video, I'm planning on making more of these physics videos while uploading some unrelated content in between. I want to eventually make a physics video for every main character in Sonic. The only problem being that I don't really have any ideas. I know this may seem like I'm begging for engagement, but if you guys have any ideas for what to analyze about a specific character, hit me up, the comments are always open. I read every comment you guys post, and I appreciate all the feedback. Anyways, the drag coefficient can kiss my ass.